Today, Kenneth will be taking us on a journey to Rome, the Eternal City, and one of the most popular destinations for travellers around the globe. As always, we've allowed time at the end of the talk to answer any questions that you have, so please feel free to send these through using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. A very quick introduction, but Kenneth, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Dimity. Delighted to be here again. This is lecture number 3 this week for me, and I've got 2 more to go. Sorry, I can hear an ambulance down on Spring Street. Many of you know I live on Spring Street in the city. Occasionally I have an ambulance go past. And I might just apologise if you hear a bump in the background. I'm in a very old apartment building, and they're doing some renovations about 3 floors down, and every now and again there's a bash of a jackhammer. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to the beautiful city of Rome, the Eternal City, one of the great cities of the world. In fact, one of the most ancient cities of the world. Many of you will know it from your own travels. Some of you might know it from these classic films such as Gidget Goes to Rome, or indeed, you might remember Roman Holiday with Audrey Hepburn and Gregory Peck in 1953. Wonderful images, isn't that fantastic? Scooting down the road in not in a very road safety inclined way, no helmets, things that could catch on wheels, very bad traffic. Well, you need to know the Roman traffic. Driving in Rome, it can be quite a challenge, but still an incredibly entertaining and beautiful piece of filming, which captures many of the quintessential qualities of the city of Rome. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the coat of arms of the city. It's the Roman, or SPQR, translates quite literally the Roman Senate and people, or more freely, the Senate and the people of Rome. You can see that this symbol is emblazoned across many monuments within the city itself. I have travelled to Rome, I've lost count, it would have to be 20 or 30 times over the years. It continues to draw me back, and every time I go and look at different churches and different monuments, etc. And of course, you can always find one of these chaps dressed up, and they will happily pose with you for a photograph for a very nice, let's say, financial compensation. Now, this gentleman is dressed in the uniform of a Roman legionnaire. Now, remember that Rome was the capital of the Roman Empire, one of the great empires of history, extending right across the Mediterranean. At one stage, Rome ruled all of the shores of the Mediterranean and virtually all the shores of the Black Sea. And what kept Rome together was its extraordinary administration, the system network of roads, very powerful maritime fleet, very well organised military units in the form of these legionnaires. They did have a few losses, but not too many. And indeed, they were the group that held the empire together and also expanded it. And if you could survive your time with the Roman legions, if you were not a citizen of the Roman Empire, you could be rewarded with citizenship. I thought I'd put this chap in as well. This is actually a doll that you can buy when you go to a souvenir shop in Rome. And this gentleman is what is known as a Praetorian Guard. You know he's Praetorian because he's wearing the beautiful purple coloured robe, which is very much the imperial colour. You wouldn't want to mess with him. You certainly wouldn't want to have a go at the emperor or indeed senators, because they guarded all of the official facilities, but most notably the emperor. And also it's interesting that often the danger lay within the Senate rather than outside the Senate. And I thought I'd just bring it into a nice little contemporary flavour. These are 2 strikingly handsome young men who, don't they know it, the way they're posing in the street on that beautiful marble-covered pedestrian street. They are Roman or Carabinieri, what I might call the creme de la creme of the police enforcement agencies in Rome. Roman soldiers and military people, they always have spectacularly charming uniforms, and these 2 are certainly continuing that reputation. Rome is on the River Tiber. Its source, and of course, so its source for its reason for being a very important trading centre midway up the Italian coast. And it's also a city where we see it sort of building around this river. And if I take my little red dot here, which I hope most of you can see, I can bring you right through here. You can see the old wall that used to go around the city. And down here, you can see remnants of the wall. And this was the central core. And just to give us a little bit of bearing, I thought I might just point out some obvious monuments. Of course, we have the country within a country, the Vatican City over here, and the Basilica of St Peters. We've got the famous Pantheon, one of the greatest architectural treasures. This is a building which is several thousand years old, and it continues to be used today. The beautiful monument to Victor Emmanuel II, the great, it features on many postcards. It also has a memorial status. The famous Colosseum here, the great triumphal arch of Emperor Constantine. We actually have the baths of Caracalla, one of the great emperors. So you can see many of these great buildings through this. There's the Trevi Fountain up there. And this is really the central core of the city. The history of Rome is complex and it can be confusing. And let me just run through this really quickly, and you don't need to remember it. It's always available. The great thing about life, you can just take out your mobile phone and type in the question. Essentially, when you think of Italy and you think of the boot of Italy with the heel and the toe kicking Sicily along, it was a series of tribes. And eventually those tribes, some of them grew, some of them waned. And we see the emergence, of course, of powerful tribes in the central part of Italy. And the city itself is founded in the 9th century BC. And we have on that peninsula a number of sort of, let me say, small kingdoms, some of them paying allegiance to each other, and emerging out of this period of history, we see the beginnings of the Roman Empire and what we call the Roman Republic. And this great empire will shape history for several centuries, and it would become, as I said, one of the great empires of the world. Of course, towards the end of the Roman Empire, when it went into a decline, and when I did medieval studies over 30 years ago now, it would be over 30 years ago, I can remember that one of the first books that we looked at when we were looking at the story of the Roman Empire was Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which sort of charts the growth and indeed the decline of the empire. The Roman Empire, as it started to decline, split into two, east and west. Rome remained the capital in the west, and Constantinople, named for Emperor Constantine, was the capital in the east. And in the end, it was actually Rome that fell really before Constantinople. And it was one great emperor in Constantinople, a gentleman by the name of Justinian, who's sometimes called the last Roman citizen, tried to reconquer parts of the empire in the west and actually got back into Italy, but that was ultimately to be short-lived. So we have, for a while, this Western Roman Empire here, and then we get all these tribes coming down from the north. So you've got these various powerful leaders coming down and establishing kingdoms, and it's really quite complicated. Here we see, of course, the Eastern Roman Empire. This was very short-lived, as you can see from this period, and this is really related to that time of reconquest. And after the empire literally collapsed, we see the emergence of very powerful city-states right across the Italian peninsula. And this is when we see what we call the papal states, and the Pope had a key role in ruling Rome and the area of Rome. Up in the north, we see the emergence of Florence and the Venetian Republic. They're all very powerful as well. And so it was quite a mosaic. And then we see the emergence of the unified Italy, the Kingdom of Italy, which ran from 1870 to 1946. And then, of course, after the end of the monarchy, we see in 1946, the Italian Republic. That little reference at the bottom of the page, Vatican City, is about the Vatican City having its own designation as an independent state within the Italian countryside. But it's a very checkered history, the Roman history. Here's a lovely illustration. King Ulrich I, a Visigothic king from the north. It's a 15th century illustration of the sacking of Rome in 410. So it's looking back. And look, they're carrying off with lovely objects, beautiful objects from altars, and people are murdered and raped, and the place is really pillaged. But let's take our story back to what is the classical beginnings of the city. The story goes it was Romulus and Remus who were raised by a she-wolf. And of course, this is a very much part of the folklore. And you will find this sort of statue replicated all over the cities, the beginnings of the Roman world. There it is depicted once again on top of a column. And if you look carefully at this great column with the tourists taking the photos here, you can see these scrolls, and they represent the Ionic order. Remember that the Roman Empire comes after the Greek world. And so we get the Greek world and then we get the Roman world. And Rome takes the very best of the Greek world, including many of the gods who have different names. And it takes all of these elements and tries to do even better. One of the most interesting things about the Roman Empire is that they actually developed concrete, which the Greeks didn't have, which meant they could build even more, more interesting, when I say interesting, more extraordinary buildings such as the Pantheon. So here we have this story epitomized on the top of the column. And if you look very carefully, you can see an egg shape here, 3 egg shapes. Well, that's egg, and then there's a little spike in between. So that's what we call egg and dart design. At its height, the Roman Empire in the 117 AD period, as I said, ruled the entire Mediterranean coast and most of what we now know as the Black Sea just up here. All of this wealth of the empire was pouring in to Rome itself, to the city of Roma. Many of these areas were ruled by governors. They were imperial provinces. Others were ruled what were in an arrangement called senatorial provinces. Just over where I've got the red dot is where the city of Carthage was. You might remember Hannibal and the elephants going across the Alps to try and invade Rome and destroy the Roman Empire. They lost in the end, and Carthage would be sacked. But the Roman Empire really did extend right around this impressive Mediterranean Sea. Client states referred to areas where tribes have actually acknowledged and indeed pay respects to the Roman Empire. You can see that little bit of area just here near where the word Iberia is. That is really marking the fact that that area wasn't actually completely and utterly controlled. You'll also notice that the empire stops rather abruptly across the middle of Europe, roughly along the banks of the Rhine up to this area where Vienna is today. And up north, there were the terrible tribes of the north. And behind this sort of wall of steel provided by the Roman soldiers, this was the empire, which was very efficiently run. And at the heart of the empire was the great city of Rome itself. You can see the wall running around here, and you can see the Vatican City over here, or the area of the Vatican. The Castello Sant'Angelo here, which was the tomb of Emperor Hadrian. Today, it's a wonderful museum. So ancient Rome. At the heart of Rome, we have what's called the Roman Forum, which is just up to here. We actually have another forum, and of course, many of these forums are named for Roman emperors. The most important emperor, the one that begins it all, is a man by the name of Augustus. We have the beginnings of what would become the Colosseum, the major ground of activity, and where they have gladiatorial sports, etc. Another great place where they did enjoy entertainments was the famous Circus Maximus, which the footprint of that area still exists today. Here we see a beautiful fanciful reconstruction of the Colosseum painted in 1747 by an artist called Giovanni Paolo Panini. And this is really quite interesting because this particular work was acquired by a grand tourist. Somebody from the United Kingdom has come down there and they're collecting souvenirs to take back into sometimes a mansion, which is going to be built in the Italian or Renaissance style, or maybe in the style of Palladian architecture. And you can see this particular painting is actually held by an art museum today in the city of Baltimore, the Walters Art Museum. Artists did play around with composition. So in this one, we have a whole series of treasures. We have the beautiful Arch of Constantine, which is a triumphal arch. We have the Colosseum itself, this wonderful sort of vase-like or vase-like urn. There's an obelisk over here. And these are all reminders of the glory days of Rome. And through the middle, you've got the tourist inspecting this wonderful site at the heart of the old Roman Empire. I guess one of the most endearing and indeed enduring monuments to be found in Rome is the Colosseum. It's a place that everyone goes to, and it is a bit like going to the MCG. It was a place where people went to see great entertainments, whether it was gladiatorial conquest or indeed demonstrations of great power, athletic feats, the massacre of innocent people. When I say innocent, well, the massacre of prisoners or indeed Christians. It was the place to be seen. It could hold tens and tens of thousands of people. It could provide you with food and drink, just like you would today if you went to the MCG in Melbourne. It had stalls, it had the whole thing. It was a very festive occasion. And in fact, the idea of having games and events was part of the very fabric of the city. And it really, in some respects, kept the populace from not worrying about the lack of food or issues. They were looking forward to these great games. It's also a fantastic piece of architecture in terms of the history of architecture, because at the bottom here, it's very hard to see in this slide. Let me see if I can find. We have a Greek capital, which is called Doric. We've got the scroll, which is called Ionic. And at the top, we've got the acanthus leaf, which forms the basis of the Corinthian order. Here we have an interior of the Colosseum, Rome, 1832, showing the Stations of the Cross running around the arena. There has been much alteration to the Colosseum over the centuries. One of the things that occurred when the Roman Empire started to go into decline and no one was really enforcing the rules and things were really, let's say, a little bit of rough and ready, these monuments were a perfect source for stone for other buildings that might be constructed. The Stations of Cross within this space are very important. It reminds everyone of the fact that many Christians died within this great stadium. Here we see one of the very famous paintings by a French artist called Gérôme, and it shows, of course, the gladiatorial conquest. And the people are holding their hands up, you know, the finger up, sorry, the thumb up or the thumb down. And the emotion of the crowd was very, very interesting in helping to determine the fate of a gladiatorial conquest. And you can see in this slide, there's been incredible excavation work done on this great stadium. You can see where the actual ranked seating went. They used to have, they believe, sails that came out to provide shade for many of the patrons. And as I said, some of the walls have been restored. And one of the things that you should be aware of when you go to places like Rome, where there are ancient ruins, many of them have been, what I would say, restored, reconstructed by archaeologists. But in the case of Rome, they've done it very well. This is a lovely view of Diocletian's baths. There's also other bathhouses in the city. So many ancient monuments actually survive. And the tradition of going to the bathhouse, which is a bit like in Melbourne, going to a coffee shop. You would go there, you'd bathe, you'd be shaved, your skin would be oiled, you would enjoy wine and food laying down on couches. It was a very important social occasion, especially for someone who, like a soldier or indeed an officer returning. They would spend hours in the bathhouse. Other things also happened, but I'll let you speculate on that. The ancient Greek word of symposium was basically a drinking party. So the idea of being very clean was important to the Romans when they could find bathing facilities. And you look at many of the great cities and settlements of the Roman Empire, they all had baths. In fact, in Paris, you have the beautiful Museum of Cluny. That's actually built on the site of the old Roman baths in Paris. And you all know the city of Bath in England. Here we see this very impressive triumphal arch, which is a celebration in stone of the victories of the great emperor Constantine, one of the most recognizable monuments in the old city of Rome. Here we also have on the decorations, we've got Hadrian, another emperor, hunting for lions and sacrificing above a section of the Constantine frieze. So many of these monuments were added to by subsequent emperors as well. Such was the inspiration of this great monument that Napoleon caused the construction of this wonderful triumphal arch, the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. I consider it a great feat to be able to get to the centre. In the old days, you walk, you can actually, I think there's a tunnel, I haven't been across the centre for ages. Within this monument, you actually have the eternal flame. You can actually go to the top of it, but it's mimicking the greatness of these victory arches, which appeared quite frequently in major Roman centres. Very close by, you have the beautiful area known as the Roman Forum, and you can see this magnificent reconstructed section of a great temple or administration building within this heart of the administrative area of the ancient city. And you can see this artist's impression of what it would look like. This little round building, which I'm going to come to in a moment, is actually the Temple of Vesta. And there we look, you can see a smaller victory arch here to Emperor Septimus, I think. I've got to remember. But we're looking at the columns of the Temple of Concord. And within this site, we actually have a Christian church using stones pilfered from the ancient Roman side. I always think to myself, sometimes the world's history could be summed up by moving the same pile of rocks around. A lovely sort of panoramic shot here of some of the temples which have been partially reconstructed by archaeologists. They're always digging. Rome does have a metro system, but it's a nightmare for anyone trying to build an underground metro system, because as they dig, they always find artifacts, and it stops the progress of any metro work. The Temple of Saturn here, and obviously you can walk through this entire area, and in the distance you can just make out the beautiful Colosseum. Here we've got the footprints, I guess I would say, of various buildings. You can just see in the distance these marvelous domes, which are very much of that period, what we call the Baroque or the Baroque period. But also you can see the back of the monument to Victor Emmanuel. And indeed, just where my red dot is coming down now, this was the site of the Temple of Vesta. Here we are, the Arch of Septimus Servus. I did have the right name. I haven't lost all of my faculties at this stage. And the perennial postcard stand. Although I must say, last time I was in Rome, it was very hard to find a postcard because no one writes postcards. They take a photo and send it down the electronic highway back home. Roman Forum with the Palatine Hill in the background. We've got our arch, the three-column Temple of Vespasian, and indeed we have the Temple of Saturn. So you can see all those references to the gods and indeed to the skies above. The hill is very important because Rome is actually built on 7 hills. Beautiful painting by Canaletto of the Arch of Septimus, which is in the royal collection. This is yet another example of a grand touring acquisition that found its way to the royal collection. Canaletto is a very important artist. He paints a lot in the city of Venice. And in fact, I think if we go to the National Gallery of Victoria, there's a lovely Canaletto of a Venetian scene there. He was so good that he was mimicked. Indeed, he was copied and forged. And along with people like Rembrandt, there are many forgeries out there. In fact, many gullible, let us say, aristocrats on tours bought what they thought were going to be Canalettos, only to find that they've been painted by people in the school of Canaletto. Here is our Temple of Vesta, a beautiful structure, a very important religious site. And this is a great opportunity for me just to make a quick comment about columns, which I've done before. You notice how the columns have got a slight bulge in them? If they didn't have that bulge, we'd have a concave effect, an optical illusion. So they always need to have a slight bulge, or otherwise a narrow neck at the top and a wider base, a splayed format. This is what the temple looked like. It's an artist's impression. And you can see it's got that familiar red tile on it. And inside that temple, the Vestal Virgins were required to keep the flame burning 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, on the pain of death. Here we can see what we would know as a Vesta box, which echoes the face of an old Roman, and of course the famous Vesta matches. So people used to ask for a Vesta, not for a match. In this area, we also have Trajan's Market. Now, Trajan was one of the great emperors of Rome, a very skilled administrator and military commander, and he recorded his achievements on a column which is known as Trajan's Column. So it's literally a cartoon that describes his military conquests. There's a plaster copy of this actually held in the Victorian Albert Museum in London. And in fact, there it is, there's the plaster cast. But the monument you can see to the right where the red dot is actually Place Vendôme in the center of Paris. And that is made out of metal, that column, and it was erected by Napoleon Bonaparte. And like Trajan, he's telling the story in this little scroll-like cartoon of his great military victories, especially in the first part of his imperial reign. Many European monarchies use symbolism from the Roman period. And Napoleon was a great self-promoter, used the imperial eagle. The eagle that the Nazis used was also, draws inspiration in part from the Roman imperial eagle. The idea of great troops marching behind standards and various symbols of the collection of soldiers. And in fact, it was considered a great misfortune. Indeed, it was an absolute disaster if a legion went into battle and lost its military colours and standards. And all of that is tied up with military tradition. This is a very interesting view. This is of the Golden House, which was the residence of Emperor Nero. You remember the story of him fiddling while Rome burns, and they're still doing excavations on this site, but it's remarkable to see that quite a bit of the painted decoration actually survives. When they were doing renovations, they actually discovered in certain dark corners these wonderful decorated vases, grotesques they're called, and that was picked up by later builders and architects, designers, artists, and they often featured them in grottos. That's where the word grotto almost takes its inspiration, usually with water and in beautiful Renaissance style gardens. So you can see some of the more contemporary responses to these vases which were found in Nero's house. Another great thing about this city is its rich history in terms of the arrival of religion. It was Emperor Constantine that actually brought into the city, he was the first Roman emperor to allow Christianity to be practiced. And of course, there's a long historic tradition of Christian activity in the city. St. Peter's, of course, is the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church. Many of the religious orders are headquartered in the city. And indeed, there are many old churches. You'll see a few of them in the moment. And of course, Christians and non-Christians, they all go, they all die. And there are a couple of what we call ossuaries, where they keep the skeletons and the skulls and they stack them up, and they're laid on the walls and attached to the ceiling in quite decorative patterns. And indeed, you can visit 2 or 3 of these churches to see these remarkable sites. They have what's called, they're literally called catacombs. Very early view of, I think this is St. Peter. And of course, you'll find these gathered in many of these places around the city as well, in decorative form. This is a fantastic view here of the Circus Maximus, a great spot for chariot racing. And if I bring my slide up there, that looks like a wall, but it's an aqueduct bringing water into the heart of the city itself. And here you see the lions coming up. They used to have quite terrible sports there. They're all being, lions and tigers have been pushed out, hungry, keen to taste a bit of Christian. And of course, you'll remember those sword, sandals and sand movies. Ben-Hur, of course, Charlton Heston, one of the great Hollywood juggernaut movies, celebrating all that was good and bad about the Roman Empire. And here is a view of the great hippodrome. And I think those are that building over there is part of the Caracalla complex. It's the Baths of Caracalla, another great figure in Roman history. And that's an artist's model of what those baths would have looked like. I mean, this was an ultimate statement, in a sense, of the stability that Rome would bring to an area, obviously in its heartland, at its capital. But when they had great settlements or great provincial cities or provincial capitals, they built a forum, they would build great stone roadways, they'd have an aqueduct bringing water in if needed, and they would build bathhouses, markets, etc. Today, these areas are frequently used. They're large public areas. You can see the staging. They do operas in them. There's the hippodrome just over here. And you can see quite a large amount of vegetation right in the heart of the city. The Pyramid of Cestus. This pyramid continues to survive today, and also we have part of the original wall of the city, although being added to over the years, obviously. Of course, Rome would ultimately conquer, we all know about Antony and Cleopatra, would ultimately conquer the great ancient Egyptian empire. This is a work by one of the great artists of the Baroque or Baroque period, Piranesi. He did a lot of these very, very interesting drawings and prints, etc. They're very collectible. Most great English houses would have 2 or 3 of them hanging on a wall in a study or a library. The State Library of Victoria has a lovely collection of Piranesi prints. And then we come to one of my favorite buildings of all time. It's a glorious piece of architecture. It's the Pantheon. And if you're going to Rome, this is the place to go to. It was originally built as a temple, later converted into a church. Raphael has his grave here. It is incredible that it survived. It's been around for a couple of thousand years. In front of it, we have a beautiful Baroque style fountain. And when you go inside, you find the most extraordinary interior, which is a celebration of Roman concrete. The opening at the top is known as the oculus. There is no glass there, ladies and gentlemen. The air moves in the building and the hot air rises. Such is the force of the hot air rising. The theory is that it will push away rain and it won't enter. If there's a very heavy downpour, the rain will enter a little bit, but it's quite remarkable. But if it was just a light shower, the rain doesn't come into the building. It's the sophistication of Roman engineering and architecture is also demonstrated here with this magnificent coffering in the ceiling, which is superbly tapering to smaller boxes at the top. We've got all the classical elements running around the upper level. And here we see the interior of the Pantheon painted in the 18th century by our friend Panini. Wonderful image of grand tourists walking around admiring this wondrous space. Once again, that lovely ceiling. I can't get enough of it. And of course, later on, we're going to have dome buildings with a little structure built on the top of it, which is often referred to as a lamp to allow lights to come in to a Christian church. The tomb of Raphael, if my memory serves me correctly there. And, oh yes, the mouth of destiny. You've seen this in films. I know they even use this motif in Star Wars. You put your hand in and you wonder what's going to bite you. Beautiful painting here by Pompeo Battoni, 1778, of Francis Bassett, a grand tourist. And you can see it's a lovely contrived scene. He's got his tourist map, and we have a lovely classical image here. In the background, the Castello of Sant'Angelo and St Peters. Now, many of these young, impressionable gentlemen came to Italy to massage the mind. They would go back brimful with ideas and also collections of art in many instances. Some of them went back with the wherefore-all to build extraordinary houses as well. And indeed, this would become very much part of that whole story of the rise of the English country house. Here we see another Panini scene with all these views of Rome. And literally the people are picking the views for which they will take back to their homes in England. Let's just talk about some of this architecture a little bit more. Here we have a view of the Capitoline Hill. Today there's a magnificent statue of Marcus Aurelius here. This is very close to the monument to Victor Emmanuel. Marcus Aurelius was a great Roman leader, and his statue, which the original is housed in one of the museums to the side, is considered to be the forerunner of all great equestrian statues in the world. It shows a calm, confident leader. And there we can see it in inspiration in the form of the statue of the Marquis of Linlithgow, the first Governor General of Australia. This statue sits at the beginning of the driveway leading up to Government House here in Melbourne. The Quinarial Palace, which is a grand city palace today, it's the official residence of the President of the Republic of Italy. The Palazzo Farnese, built in that palace tradition. You can see it's very elegantly proportioned. There's another one coming up, the Palazzo Barberini. These are all famous families, ladies and gentlemen. Many of these families would produce men or would go on to become leading figures in the church, another way of attaining power, and others would continue to develop and grow the family fortunes. Here we see the Palazzo Spada. Now this is quite interesting because what we have is down here we call that, it's like or ashlar stone, but sometimes it's rough, and that's known as rusticated. But as you move up the facade, it becomes much more sculptural, it's much more finished, and there's a real story behind this in the form of Italian city palaces, which is going to actually have an influence on modern architecture today. Quite interesting, actually. There's usually a great doorway that leads into a very secure courtyard space. And how about this for architectural perspective? This shows the absolute sophistication with this beautiful barrel vault, and your eye is led to the little eye catcher at the end. Here we see a marvelous view of a city palace with the square in front of it, which accentuates its status. And many of Rome's palaces do have lovely squares in front of them. And walking inside, I didn't take this photo, but I quite like it because you can see the order and harmony of these colonnades that surround the square, sorry, the courtyard, which is enclosed therein. Here we have, now I've actually put the pronunciation of the word Sapienza, and it's the Church of St Ivo, and this is a superb example of the work of Francesco Borromini, one of the great exponents of Baroque architecture, which actually takes classical architecture and gives it a flourish, but maintains the order and harmony. We have a wonderful concave facade here, and then we have this glorious, glorious church. Look at this beautiful decorated lantern upon the dome, where, of course, the light would penetrate. And if we go inside, look at that. And if you look up there, surely you must believe there's something great and spiritual in the world that's, you know, pulling the strings of humanity, if I could use that expression. And here we see this marvelous willowy front of concave, convex, of a church on a little square. There's 4 fountains near this church, and you can see these saints in front in the facade, and indeed it's literally named for the fountain, St. Carlo. Elegant building, extraordinarily stylish, with a beautiful, complex ceiling which seems to float above the space where the church is actually located. And there you can see it. You can see that concave, convex. So the facade has harmony and balance, but it does have a sort of sense of organic quality as well. And to the side of the church is a small courtyard. It's on a very, very small footprint. Looking up the Spanish Steps, they draw their names from the fact that there was a Spanish legation to the Vatican located in this area, this marvelous square. Should you turn around, you find one of the great shopping streets of the city. Here is an image of the square by Giuseppe Vassi of the 18th century, and you can see the great fountain, often featuring in films. There are the stairs, and of course you can see people milling around because running down the streets, there's a lot of shopping opportunities. There it is. John Keats, the English poet, lived in the house just over. There's a small museum in that house. Many people traveled to the city and many stayed. Here we see a beautiful sculpture by one of the great artists of the city, Bernini, and it shows an elephant. How exotic is that? At the base, supporting one of 11 Egyptian obelisks which were souvenired in other days. And of course, the remarkable Trevi Fountain, which was at the end of a water supply, a system of pipes and indeed aqueducts. The water would pour in. Behind it, we have this majestic facade. The water gives life to it. Of course, as you know, if you stand and turn around and face away from the fountain and toss the coins over your shoulders, you are bound to return to Rome. It's a magnificent stage set piece of architecture. And it's almost as though these great figures here are performing for us. It's a superb tour de force of art and architecture fused. Isn't it wonderful? Just look at the anatomical accuracy of this great figure here. Horses pulling out, the Neptune-like character coming out of the front, and it even looks lovely at night. Whilst you admire it, you do need to hold on to your wallets and your purses, because as you admire it, the light hands of a pickpocket might disturb your tranquility. The Santa Maria della Vittoria, a beautiful church. You see, it's all about facade. And then we come inside and we see one of the most remarkable artworks. This is a depiction of the life of Teresa of Jesus, who lived between 1515 1582. It's her experience of religious ecstasy in her encounter with an angel. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this particular church or chapel was actually paid for by the people sitting in the boxes watching the action unfold on the altar. This is like a proscenium arch. It is like a piece of theatre. Bernini not only designed buildings, he designed theatre sets, he sculpted. He was an extraordinarily talented artist and architect. And in this scene, he captures a moment in a great story, a great religious story, and the action is unfolding for us way down in the body of the church. But those that paid, I think it was the Canaro family, paid for this chapel. And if I bring you into close proximity with it, you can see those shafts of light coming down. There is the angel with a golden spear, and there is Teresa. Let me read the description. I saw in his hand a long spear of gold, and at the iron's point there seemed to be a little fire. He appeared to me to be thrusting it at times into my heart, and to pierce my very entrails. When he drew it out, he seemed to draw them out also, and to leave me all on fire with a great love of God. Pain was so great that he made me moan, yet so surpassing was the sweetness of this excessive pain that I could not wish to be rid of it. The soul is satisfied now with nothing less than God. The pain is not bodily, but spiritual, though the body has its share in it. It is a caressing love so sweet, which now takes place between the soul and God, that I pray of his goodness to make him experience it who may think that I am lying. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is a powerful description. It's almost like a seduction, if I can use that word. Don't anyone out there, don't go writing that as a complaint, but it's incredibly expressive. It is her absolute passion and belief in God. And she's been, in a way, transformed by this moment of this encounter. Anyway, I better stop before I get, go off on a tangent. Here we have the civic planning, these pair of chapels. I shouldn't, it's not the world's most accurate analysis of history, but Dan Brown in these various books, of course, one is centered very much on the city of Rome, and these chapels figure in it. Piazza del Popolo. You can see here, so also what we've got is an Egyptian obelisk, and the cross has been placed on top of what essentially was a pagan monument. You can see the hieroglyphics running up the side. You can also see the water spurting out of the mouths of the sphinxes. The beautiful Ignazio di Loyola, it's a beautiful church built in 1626 for Ignatius Loyola, I should say, the founder of the Jesuit order. Look at this trompe-l'oeil ceiling. It's a remarkable apotheosis of the story of this man. This is where you see this extraordinary art. You can't buy this and put it anywhere. You've got to go and see it in situ. And of course, this is one of the very reasons why we all travel to this beautiful city. And look at the choir. You can almost smell the candles, and you can hear those voices singing in great harmony, and of course, whirring around on the walls are great depictions. The Piazza Navona, remarkable square with its grand church at the heart, yet another obelisk. In ancient times, this would be flooded for events and activities. The Church of the Gesù, another historical church with a splendid ceiling, and of course a great dome over the cross area in front of the altar. And the Triumphant of the Name of Jesus by Giovanni Battista Galli in the ceiling. Just fantastic. Look at all these floating figures there, and a lot of it is artistic illusion. You really do need, I mean, I think in a sense, you sort of need to go to a church service and just sit there and just look, because there's something going on everywhere. Neoclassicism. And here we see this classical monument. I've already referred to it, the monument to Victor Emmanuel, which also does have a status as a war monument as well. A grand piece of architecture. And at the top, we've got two sculptural arrangements. These are quadrigas, which means that there are 4 horses pulling a chariot, and you've got 2 winged victories, and she has in her hand the laurel wreath of victory. Fascist architecture. Here we have a remarkable building which was built mid-century. The idea of the modern, so you can see the classical sculptures just down here. There are some modern areas in the city which are quite incredible. Rome, of course, does have many, many fine buildings through the centuries. And in fact, they do have, it contributed in many ways to history. You know the word fascism, which comes from an old word called fasci or fasces, and it's spelled F-A-S-C-E-S. And basically, the idea of the Roman Empire is one of people marching together, living together, fighting together, working as one. And the idea that if you have one stick, you can break it. If you have a bundle of sticks, they will bend and flex, but they won't break. And then later on, you get a set of rods tied together with an axe and sometimes a spear, and that is called the fasci. And that becomes a symbol of the idea of being a citizen of Rome, working for the Roman Empire. Now, of course, there was the Senate, and one of the great stories of the Roman Empire was this great battle between the Senate and the emperor. And at certain times, the emperor would be trying to be preeminent, let me say, over the Senate. Of course, the first great emperor was indeed Augustus, but there have been many other characters along the way. Caligula, Julius Caesar, remember the Ides of March, he was actually murdered within the Senate. And we also have other figures such as Hadrian, a great military leader, Germanicus. You'll know many of those names from the Hollywood films. The modern city. There are areas of modernity in Rome. It does look chaotic when you go into the heart, but you really don't go to see these areas. You go to see these old areas. A marvelous aerial view here of the Vatican City. And there you can see the great basilica. And there you've got the arms. That's the square where the Pope meets people. There is an obelisk located here. There is the former tomb of Hadrian, the castle of St Angelo, and this is of course the Vatican City. It's a wonderful construction. There is the frontal view. The Pope appears on this balcony. Just over here is where the smoke pops out when there's a new Pope elected. I will tell this story. Many years ago, I had an Irish friend, and she was heading off to Uluru, or Ayers Rock, was being called in those days. And she said to me, she said, "Oh, Kenneth, I'm going off to Uluru with the family." And I said, "Are you going to climb it?" She said, "Oh, no, I could not climb it." I said, and I asked the question, being cheeky, "Why not?" She said, "It is a place of spiritual significance to Australia's Aborigines," which it is. And I've been to Uluru many times, but I've never wanted to climb it. Anyway, she said, "No, we would never climb it. It'd be like walking on the roof of somebody else's church." And I said, "Well, just remember when you go to Rome, if you pay a few euros, you can actually take a lift up, and you can go here and you can climb up through the dome to the very top, to the pinnacle, which is the lantern on top of that dome. And it's a way of making money to help keep the building going." So she was very bemused by that. And I said, I always recall on one occasion I was going up to the top of the dome, and I had a group of nuns in front of me, and one of them had a panic attack, and it required my gentle application. I do this with all great integrity, ladies and gentlemen. We're in a narrow part on an angle, and I had to put my hands, with the encouragement of the sisters around me, and give her a gentle nudge, and she moved forward. And she looked at me, and I said, "The Lord moves in mysterious ways. Get moving, otherwise we'll be crushed." And there we are, tourists thronging to this lovely area in the city. And there we have a view of the Pope standing on the balcony, looking out over the city. The arms that draw you into the heart of the Catholic Church actually were designed by Bernini. So it's like a great big theatre set. This is where the set pieces of the church unfold. And I give thanks every day to the Christian faith, because I wouldn't have a job if I didn't have the church, or indeed other religions, because they build so many buildings all over the world. A wonderful scene of arrival of an ambassador to the Holy See. Beautiful drawings here. Many architects worked on the building. The magnificent dome with its lantern, the extraordinary interior, and over the main altar area we have the wonderful arrangement of Solomonic columns which remind you of the Temple of Solomon. It's just the most wondrous space. There we are. We're standing right up near that canopy, which of course is so important. There's the altar where you will see the Pope or other senior members of the church's bacchanal. Great throngs of crowd there. You can even make out a few of the Swiss guards. So the Pope is within that photograph. The tomb, or the tombstone of Pope Alexander VII, designed by Bernini. And of course, Michelangelo's magnificent Pieta, a wonderful dramatic moment in the religious story. Of course, we have the beautiful Vatican Museum, replete with great treasures. The magnificent Sistine Chapel, where you stand with crowds and hope to get some sort of inspiration. Look at that extraordinary painting of the creation. I'm going to do a lecture next year on nudity in art, and I've done one before for a gallery group, which went down a real treat. And it's a real delicacy of how you actually present the naked form, but this moment when the fingers touch is almost going to spark of life. There it is in close focus. And as I come towards the end, we come to some reflections. The beautiful Borghese Gallery, one of my favorite museums in Italy, but also obviously in Rome. It's surrounded by beautiful gardens. The Borghese family were a very, very powerful family. It contains a stellar collection of art presented in the most extraordinarily beautiful interior. Here we have Titian's Sacred and Profane Love. You can see the profane on the right and the sacred on the other side. We've got a little cherub-like character plunging his arm into the water, and we wonder what will transpire. Caravaggio, that great Italian master artist, the boy with a basket of fruit. Caravaggio got himself into trouble quite frequently with his commissioning, I shouldn't say agents. He was commissioned by many powerful individuals and indeed members of the church to do great paintings of saintly scenes. And sometimes he would depict the saint with dirty feet. He was well known for taking young men off the streets to use them as models. He had a fairly, let's say, exciting life. In fact, he had to decamp from Rome and go all the way down to Malta because he got involved in a scuffle and someone died. There's quite a checkered history to Caravaggio, but a brilliant depictor of the human. And he's well known, he's in the same school of Rembrandt in their ability to depict light and shadow, which is known as the chiaroscuro effect. And you can see this is a really, really beautiful image. It's almost a precursor to the idea of Bacchus and wine and grapes, youth leading into trouble, guess. A lovely self-portrait of Bernini. So he's obviously painted by himself, making sure he does look sort of handsome. And here we see a beautiful work of Pauline Bonaparte, of course, related to Napoleon, by Canova. And this exquisite ability to produce a realism in marble is superbly illustrated there. One of those lovely films where the gentleman takes in the beauty of this extraordinary figure. Look at the way in which the back has been executed. It is though if you put your hand on it, you'd feel real skin. The Bridge of Angels near the Castel Sant'Angelo, the beautiful monument leading to this extraordinary building, which was built in 134 AD, greatly added to over the years. Originally the mausoleum for Hadrian, and this is part of the interior of this building, often featuring in films a lovely view down over our magnificent Colosseum. So bring it all into perspective. There is the Arch of Constantine, the Arch of Septimus, right into the square. And of course, over here, we've got our monument to Victor Emmanuel. And if we were to go in that direction, we'd find the Vatican. Our marvelous Pantheon, Marcus Aurelius galloping confidently, and this extraordinary collection of beautiful Baroque domes. I have but scratched the surface, ladies and gentlemen, as we wander down the streets, taking in this majestic city with its beautiful culture. Look at the mopeds everywhere. Looking down from the Spanish Steps, the shopping nirvana, set for Christmas, a very special place to be in Christmas. They have their own arcades, and this is the Galleria Alberto. Here it is, dressed for Christmas a few years back. And as we continue on, the colours of Italy displayed in the festoon lighting as people go out and shape. It will be a very different Christmas in Rome this year. The Piazza Navona is converted into a Christmas market. And I was only reading an article this morning. There's always politics about who gets a stall where. And let's say there's a healthy enthusiasm amongst the traders. The splendid view of the Colosseum with the Christmas tree. Of course, Christianity and the Colosseum are so intimately entwined together. There is our beautiful St Peters. As we come towards the end, the shaft of light comes in through the lantern to illuminate the stories in one of Rome's beautiful churches. Of course, the city where you can really experience the Roman way of life. It's a great city. I hope it will recover from COVID. You get yourself a sandwich, maybe a carbonara, and maybe a coffee with a little pastry, and the world is all very, very good. There we are, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. If you've got any questions or whatever, you can see my email, info@kennethpark, below the email for Dimity. I believe we've got one more lecture for the rest of the year, and Dimity will correct me on this. I think I'm talking on Lord Howe and Norfolk Island. I'm giving so many lectures this day, I get confused. But it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today, and I'll just see if there's any questions.
So that is correct, Kenneth. That is the right lecture. So Lord Howe and Norfolk Island on the 15th, but we'll send out an email with more details around that. We have had 2 questions come in.
That's really very interesting. I love these questions, Dimity. First of all, I like the name anonymous attendee. Does the theory work? Does the hot hair rising through the hole in the dome really keep the rain out? Well, I've been there and the rain has come in, but most times when it rains lightly, it depends on the heaviness of the fall. And I'd also think if there was a lot more people in there, there'd be a lot more hot air rising, but it basically does work. There are certain buildings in Europe where they have a glazing over the oculus at the top, but the theory, yes, I must go and read the story again, but I've certainly been there and it's been raining outside and the water hasn't been coming into the building. And the second question is, did Rome suffer much damage during World War II? Mussolini was quite a character, and Mussolini, Adolf Hitler, they all took the idea of fascism and they took it to somewhere where it shouldn't really go. And he was tough. He was conniving and calculating. And of course, as we know, the Allied forces made their way up from the island of Sicily along the Italian peninsula. I'm sure you've all seen films like Patton and whatever. And many buildings were destroyed. Italy suffered quite considerably during World War II. Every bridge below the Ponte Vecchio in Florence was destroyed between Florence and the sea. Areas where there was modern industrialization, they were destroyed. Rome was bombed. And if you wanted to actually look at it, you could actually go on to Google and Google Rome, Wikipedia, and there's a photograph showing Rome being bombed in World War II. Now, it wasn't bombed extensively. It was more about aiming at infrastructure targets. I mean, the Western world was very, I mean, it's a strange thing to say, but Western allies were very conscious of the importance of the monuments. And we all know the stories of cities where certain buildings and structures were, they endeavored not to bomb them because it would be a loss to humanity generally. But bombs were definitely dropped on the city. Rome wasn't a very pleasant place during World War II. The Nazis really inspired the Italian fascists to do quite nasty things. And it was a very tough existence. And I'm sure you've seen all the films about the complicity thereof of religious figures, etc. So it does have a fairly, like all places in Europe and around the world involved in World War II, there are many sides to the story, but it was bombed, but not extensively. I think that's about it. And I'd like to say thank you. Lovely to have you here again. And hopefully I'll see some of you for the final lecture for the year. May I say good afternoon, stay healthy. The figures are looking good for infections. They're zero, the best way to go. And it's been an absolute delight to be with you this afternoon. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. Good afternoon, everyone.